we'll record some parts again, if needed. Like, that's not a problem at all. If you have time, I have time. Richard always has time. He has no life, and I'm so nice to him that he can never say no.
It's true.
Yeah.
I believe the exact phrase was, "Bitch, on Friday I own you."
Do you have that on tape? Please tell me you have that on tape.
Oh,
I possibly do, because you record everything.
God. I'm gonna erase all the tapes. Delete the channel.
Please send that to Mittens. Mittens will make good use of it.
Oh my god, yeah. 420! Bitch, on Friday, I own you. 420! It's gonna be the best one yet. Left? Babe, apparently at some point, I said to Richard, "Bitch, on Friday, I own you," but I don't believe I would ever say such a thing. Okay, my boyfriend like, yes, you would. So, can you tell me about Velka and her role in Dark Souls 1?
She used to be just a placeholder, I guess, for a very abstract concept like sin.
Like me?
No. Well, I've told you should do a lore video about how you are actually Velka, right?
I
Goddess
know,
of Sin.
right?
But Dark Souls 1 kind of gave us hints about the lore, but it left a lot of gaps. And I think Dark Souls 3 kind of fills those gaps. And I think it did it for Velka as well. So we can infer more of her lore now than we could back then. Like I said, Dark Souls 1 kind of gave us a few hints about her. She was called a black-haired witch. She was the goddess of sin, a rogue deity. It was kind of implied that she was involved with the Occult Rebellion and the Painted World.
Mm-hmm. Richard?
Velka's role in Dark Souls 1, she's described as a rogue deity. She's a deity that stands apart from the other gods, and she is a goddess who governs sin. The first time she's explicitly mentioned in the playthrough is when you meet Oswald of Karim. He sells you a book, a thing called the Book of the Guilty, that if you are invaded by another player, you can use the Book of the Guilty to list them as a sinner, which allows them to be invaded by Dark Moon Knights. He also sells some Velka miracles, and he wears a black, very sort of sinister-looking black outfit that he's called a pardoner, because he pardons people's sins. So he's a servant of Velka, and he allows you to mark another player as a sinner, and also to pardon your own sins by giving him souls. So Velka is a kind of legalistic deity, I guess. The sin that you get, it's not a moral failing, it's just like if you do something, then there's a certain punishment associated with doing that, and you can either get invaded by a dark moon, or you can pay to have your sin removed. And basically because Velka is described as she's a black-haired witch, and she's associated with crows later on, there's a theory that the giant crow that picks you up at the start of the game and then drops you at Firelink Shrine might actually be Velka or an avatar of Velka. So it's possible that's our first encounter with Velka, but the first encounter with Oswald of Karim is the first time Velka is mentioned by name. So that's Velka.
And now, Bob, you were also talking about Velka and Sin. Could you elaborate on that?
She was called the goddess of sin. But sin was basically a mechanic. There wasn't much lore to it. But there's like karmic justice. So karmic justice says that it was her task to define what a sin is, and also to define what the punishment will be. So it kind of places her role in relation to sin itself. And the Book of the Guilty says that the guilty are those who have disrespected the gods or their covenants. So it's just a hint, but the game also tells us what she has defined as a sin. So it's like in our world, in our culture, we have this common understanding, universal understanding of what constitutes a sin. But even in our world, different cultures would have different views of it, right? In Dark Souls was the same thing. Sin itself is a very vague concept, but they have defined what sins are through the Book of the Guilty, through Velka. And I think that now, with Dark Souls 3, we can kind of infer how that actually plays out in the lore.
By the way, what's the Occult Rebellion?
It was a rebellion made by men against the gods, but there wasn't much about them as well back then. Like, at the time during which we get to play the game, the rebellion already happened and it failed. There were hints about it, like some of the items related to Velka. There was a shield down at the catacombs, and there was a secret room in Anor Londo where you could find Havelset alongside with a club that had occult damage to it. So it was also assumed that Havel had taken part in the rebellion as well. But the rebellion failed, it faded away, and that was basically the end of it.
Were Havel and Velka a couple?
Not that I know of.
Richard, were Havel and Velka a couple?
Why not? Yeah.
Yay!
What happens is that there are certain weapons in Dark Souls, just the first one, that have a hidden modifier. Occult is an upgrade path in Dark Souls. It's a faith scaling damage thing, and what it does is it will do bonus damage against things that are considered to be like gods or servants of gods. So like the Anor Londo Sentinels and Gwendolyn and people like that will suffer bonus damage if you're carrying a weapon that is occult. And the occult things are associated with Velka. You find them in the Painted World, and as Bob said, you find one in Havel's room. So that's the deal with occult. It's like anti-deity weapons.
What started the rebellion? What's its purpose? Why are they rebelling?
So it's presented as a very generic rebellion, like man wanted to rebel against the gods, right? But we kind of find out that Kaf has been stoking these flames, right? He was manipulating the four kings and New Londo. So it kind of goes along with the goals that he's presenting of bringing down the gods and letting the first flame fade and establishing a dark age of man. And I guess that's it.
Richard, do you have anything to add?
About the Occult Rebellion thing.
Like the same question.
Well, I'm not sure if it's like an organized rebellion so much as you just find certain people who have issues with the gods. Like, it doesn't seem like there's an official kind of organization to it. It's just that. Hang on. Sorry, this is very unprofessional. I will look up what Dark Souls 1 weapons have the occult thing on them.
So unprofessional. This is serious business.
That's true. Okay, so the weapons that have the occult thing are so you can make your own occult weapons by just upgrading up the occult pathway. So the occult weapons that you find outside of that are the Dark Hand that you get from Karth, the club in Havel's room, Priscilla's dagger, and the Velka rapier that the Pardoners have, that Oswald has and you can get in the Painted World. The enemies that are susceptible to occult are the the Silver and Black Knights that serve Gwyn, and the Sentinels in Anor Londo, the big golden guys, along with Ornstein, Gwyndolin, and Gwyn. And also, for some reason, I guess because he serves the Way of White, Paladin Leroy, the character, will take bonus damage from Occult. So the idea is Occult is like an anti-deity effect that you find on some weapons in the game that lets you kill deities easier. The as far as there being like a rebellion, I don't know if it's like, as I was saying, an organized rebellion. It just seems like there's some, like, Priscilla has it, Velka has it, Havel kind of has it, and because Havel doesn't use that club when he fights you, he uses his dragon tooth, and Karth has it, and that's kind of it. Like, you can see why Karth would have it, because he is trying to overthrow Gwyn. Priscilla has it because she is this thing that should not be, and Velka has it because Velka seems associated with this occult stuff.
About the rebellion being organized, we don't find a lot of remnants of the rebellion because, well, it's a failed rebellion, right? If they had won, we would find a lot of occult stuff and not a lot of, like, divine stuff, for instance. But they lost, so they're gone. Which, of course, makes it kind of hard to make up your mind whether they actually had an organized rebellion or not. But we have Kaf behind the Four Kings in New Londo, and we also have, like, I mentioned a shield down in the catacombs. The shield says that there was a plot to destroy the very gods, and that the followers of the cult tried to steal Nero's power, which is assumed to be the right of kindling. So that item, like, specifically says that there was a plot to destroy the gods, and that it was carried out by the followers of the occult.
Oh, sick burn on Richard. What do you say to that, JSF?
Yeah, that can work as well. The Occult Rebellion thing's not around at the time that we play the game, so it's possible it is a relic of a former rebellion that we don't see.
That wasn't very exciting. I was expecting you guys to get into a fist fight or something.
No, you need to around to do that.
God. Thank you, Bob. By the way, Bob, you're doing very well, because I sense you're a little nervous, maybe?
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah? Okay, no, you're doing super good.
You're so nice.
Because he's not you.
I know, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking when we talk, you're just like, piece of we're recording now.
Yeah. No, but I was nice to you in the beginning. Don't you remember?
It's true, yeah.
So should I do it just this once and enjoy while she's nice and then stop it?
Yes,
Probably.
yeah, she'll just gradually get used to bullying you.
My boyfriend just told me to be nice to GSF, and he's giving me this crazy look. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, enjoy it while you can, Bob. It's not gonna last.
Okay.
Yeah, I was super nice to GSF.
It took about 6 months for you to just start bullying me constantly.
Well, at least she still sounds nice while she's bullying, so
it's true.
That's so psychotic, though, isn't it? Oh, what a nice bully.
You'd make a good villain, I guess.
If I said I haven't heard that before, I'd be lying. Can you name the items that connect Velka to the occult, please?
Some of them actually connect her to both the Occult Rebellion and the Painted Word, because they can be found inside the Painted Word of Ariamis. There's the Occult Amber that's in there. Velka's Rapier is also in there, and it has occult damage. And the Pardoner set is also inside the Painted Word, if I recall correctly. So they are linking both the Painted Word and the Occult Rebellion. also inside the painted world, there is a statue of Velka that is protected by some phalanx guys. The one that turns around when you open the door that leads you to Priscilla. And that statue is also found in New Londo, next to the entrance to the Abyss. That's just a side note, but the Mask of Velka says that their masks symbolize separation from worldly desires, I think. And I don't know, to me, that kind of reflects the whole idea of the painted world, right? You're separating yourself from the rest of the world. You're forlorn, you're persecuted, so you leave all of that behind and go live inside the painting. So, personally, in my head canon, I kind of draw that connection as well.
Mm-hmm. Richard?
The association between Velka and the painted world is basically, like Bob said, that you find a bunch of Velka stuff there. The statue of Velka is like, we didn't know that was a statue of Velka until Dark Souls 3. Like, there's a statue of a woman, and then when we go back there in Dark Souls 3, it looks like the Velka statue. So we can assume it's the same statue. The painted world is kind of like a prison almost for like things that should not exist. Get drawn into the painted world as kind of a means of containment. So you have Priscilla in there, who is... she's some sort of crossbreed. We don't know what the story with her is exactly, but it's like the notion is she shouldn't exist. So she's pulled inside this painting where she's separated from the rest of Lordran. You also have, there's an area that's full of basically prison cells, where presumably people who were like locked up in the painted world. There's also a lot of hollows there that have this infection that you see around Izalith, the sort of eggs growing on them. It's where you meet Xanthus King Jeremiah, who is described, I think he's described explicitly as an exile from his homeland. And he's got a huge wrap around his head, and a lot of the other hollows there have these huge swollen, like blistering heads, and I think the implication, at least at that point, was that Jeremiah's head was swollen like theirs, and that's why he had that huge crown around him. And they retconned that in 3 by saying that he was turning into a mushroom. So you find a lot of what we were talking about before, these occult things that are designed to kill deities. The other thing about Velka, which I forgot to mention before, about when you first meet Oswald, is that you can get a talisman of Velka from him. And Velka's talisman is unique because every other talisman in the game scales with your faith. But Velka's talisman scales with your intelligence.
Yeah, I know that.
What?
Professional. I said it scales with your intelligence.
It sure does.
I'm a professional. I did one lore video on Velka. I know everything.
So yeah, Velka's talisman scales with your intelligence instead of your faith, which further puts her like aside from the other deities. And the other thing about the painted world is it's full of these crow people that are half human, half crow. And when you kill them, they have a very rare chance of dropping the item that you get when you kill a sinner as a Dark Moon Knight. It's called the Symbol of Reprisal. And the idea is that like those are Velka's crow servants, and that's why they have that item on them. And I think they're officially like called the Crow People of Velka in the guidebook or something. So From officially linked them with Velka. But the weird thing is that the use of those items is you give them to Gwendolyn, who is not a Velka guy. He's his own character. It's not like you give those items to Oswald or something to level up this covenant. It's actually associated with Gwendolyn, and Gwendolyn is one of the gods. So it's a bit kind of confusing that you have one of the gods working with Velka who is sort of aside from the gods and hostile toward the gods, and you can justify it in game as like, okay, Gwendolyn is himself apart from the other gods, and he's protecting, people. He's protecting the other gods with the help of Velka, I guess. But the actual reason for that is that originally Velka was going to have her own covenant, and it got cut, so they kind of folded it in with the Dark Moon one that Gwendolyn runs.
Can I just add something
Oh,
to
yeah, of
what he
course.
said
Go
now.
ahead. Perfect. Yeah, you can add anything you want.
So the painted world can serve as a prison, but it can also serve as a safe haven, I think.
Mhm.
Like the peculiar doll states that she was drawn to the painted world. She wasn't dragged. She was already imprisoned somewhere else, like in the undead asylum where we find the doll. And then she was drawn to the painted world. She escaped from her prison into the painted world. And we leave the painted world just by jumping in a hole. So people can actually leave the painted world. And there was one interview from Miyazaki where he says that the painted world can serve as a place where people go to when they are persecuted. So I think it can serve both ways, you know.
We can talk about the club.
The BFF club? Everyone's invited except for Richard.
The occult club that you find
Is it like a occult nightclub? Is Velka partying there?
Yes, yes. The way that you find the occult club is there's a secret passage. Yeah, it's like an illusory wall.
Is there a bouncer at the front? I'm sorry.
Yes, yes.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
The Silver Knight is the bouncer.
I had like 5 coffees today, and they're kicking in all at the same time right now.
This is the problem with you sleeping 4 hours a night.
Bob, help.
So what?
Sorry. Okay.
What?
Composure.
All right. Okay.
Start again.
Okay. So the way you find the occult club is you go through an illusory wall in Anor Londo, and there's this kind of hidden dark room, and there's 2 chests, I think, that just have Havel set in them. And then there's a 3rd chest that's got the occult club in it, but that chest is a mimic. It's hard to tell what's going on, because either the mimic is there as a trap to trap people who are trying to steal Havel's stuff. And that, I don't know why the occult club is like, I don't know, maybe it's just there. Or it's Havel's occult club and he put it in a mimic so it's harder to, like, get anyone snooping around in his secret room will be killed if they find the occult club. But it's kind of not clear why exactly it's happening. Like, it seems significant. But there's multiple ways to read it.
So, Bob, do you have anything to add to the Occult Club?
No. I agree with him that...
Don't say that. Don't agree with Richard.
Why?
He has too much self-esteem.
No, I don't.
His head's gonna get so big, he's gonna be like an enlarged head guy who sings.
Sinclair's definition of too much self-esteem is that, like, I occasionally answer back. She hasn't completely broken me yet.
I think that's kind of like her life lessons.
Yeah.
Like, you should learn to defend yourself from her.
Yeah, Richard. Stand up for yourself, bro.
Sorry.
I like how Bob is almost joining in on this. Not quite. He's not crossing that line, but he's like almost on the border there.
No, I'm not bullying anybody. I'm just making an observation.
That's even better. All right, sorry. So, Bob, what do you think about what Jess have just said?
Okay, I want to say that I agree, but can I?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So, I agree with what he said. So,
Awesome. All right, you don't really have to. If you agree, I don't even have to put that in.
oh my god.
Poor Bob. He's like, they seem normal in chat.
No, this is awesome.
So let me ask you, why is Velka part of this? What's her beef with the old gods?
Well, because Velka's described as a rogue deity who stands apart from the other gods. So I don't think she's not friends with them. She's not part of that pantheon. She's just this thing that exists off to the side. I think the idea is because she governs sin, that she's supposed to be impartial. So she doesn't have pre-existing relationships with the other gods.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that answer, but I was actually talking to Bob.
What?
How did you even get in this podcast, Richard? What are you even doing here? Sorry. So, Bob, I have the same question to you. What is Velka's stake in being part of the rebellion? Or rebelling against the gods?
So she's called the goddess of sin, but it's kind of not specified what sins are besides the mechanic that we encounter as a player. But the Book of the Guilty says that the guilty are those who have disrespected the gods and their covenants. So I think that now that we have Dark Souls 3, we can kind of infer that the gods would have done that. They did that in the Ringed City. Like, they used humans, they used the First Man and the Pygmies to fight the dragons, and then they trapped them in the Ringed City, and they trapped the Pygmies in the future using Filianor.
So basically, their sin is like exploiting people for their own gains?
Yeah, according to the phrasing of the item of the Book of the Guilty, it's breaking their covenants. Like, they had this covenant, this pact with man, and then they broke it. So, according to Velka's view, that's a sin that she would have to correct.
Okay.
And I think that's the first sin, the first time they sinned in her eyes. But I don't think that's the main reason for her to be joining the rebellion. I think the main reason is her daughter, because I think she's the mother of the painter in the painted world of Ariandel. I think that's the main reason. So the painter is assumed to be a crossbreed, right? Like Priscilla.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're both in the painted world. She's got like snake eyes and scales and stuff. So I think there were 4 crossbreds. The painter, Priscilla, Yorshka, and Gwendolyn. When they locked away Priscilla, they sinned again. Right?
Okay.
I think all the crossbreds were born of the goddesses of Unerlondo. The painter was born out of Velka, Priscilla was born out of Guinevere, Yorshka was born of Filianor, and Gwendolyn was born of Gwyn's wife, ex-wife. But when they found out about Priscilla and her life hunt powers, they got scared, right? And locked her away. They exiled her. And that would have been their second sin. So the reasoning behind the crossbreed experiments isn't specified by the game. My personal view is that Sif was conducting these experiments on behalf of Gwyn, so they could create a breed of gods that could survive without the first flame, because Gwyn already knew that the first flame would fade eventually, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they were crossbreeding gods with dragons, because dragons don't need the first flame.
Right. Okay.
So the first peak, of course, would be the goddesses of Unerlondo, because they're more important. But after the life hunt incident, whatever, they locked away Priscilla, and that kind of pissed off the other mothers, right?
Mm-hmm. And when you say they locked away Priscilla, where did they lock her away? You mean before she was drawn into the painted world?
Yeah, in order to get to the painted world proper, we need to use her doll, and we find it in the Undead Asylum. Like, we need to go back to the Undead Asylum using the crow that brought us to Lordran, and we find the doll inside one of the cells. And the doll says that she was imprisoned, and I think it says she was imprisoned, but it's inside a prison cell. So
Yeah, so that's where she presumably stayed for a little while.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Okay, that's cool, yeah.
They would be persecuting the crossbreds, right? They would persecute the crossbreds. It started with the live hunt thing, but if you kind of look at it, all the crossbreeds, they kind of have a hint of dark. Like GSF mentioned, Priscilla's dagger, you can get it through her tail, if you cut her tail, and it has occult damage. Gwendolyn has the Blades of the Dark Moon, and the Dark Moon blade has a purple hue that is very distinct to Dark Miracles and Sorceries. The painter, she's going to paint with the dark blood of man, the blood of the dark soul. It's kind of a hint that she may be related to the dark. And if I'm correct about Yorshka being born of Filianor kind of has like these dark tendrils growing out of her eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she hatched from the egg that Filianor is holding. And the inside of the egg seems to be corrupted by the dark. So even though Priscilla was persecuted for the life hunt, I think they would all be persecuted for this reason as well. So they would fear both things. Like all crossbreeds may have the life hunt powers, and all crossbreeds may be related to the dark. So that would raise the stakes for Velka, right? She would have to protect her daughter.
Right. And could you quickly explain what the life hunt actually is and why it's dangerous?
Well, that's actually kind of a hard question. So in Dark Souls 1, we had the life hunt scythe, which was Priscilla's weapon, the weapon that she wielded. And the weapon states that in the hands of a mortal, the power will turn against themselves, will turn against them. So I don't think the scythe itself was the power of the life hunt. I think it was a power that she possessed, and that it ended up being imbued into the weapon. The way the weapon works is you inflict bleed damage on your enemy, but you also inflict bleed damage on yourself, bleed build-up on yourself. I think it's 50 on your enemy and 40 on you. And after the build-up is done, the bleed damage itself, it's very high, actually. Priscilla's dagger also inflicts bleed damage. It has occult and bleed damage. And I think these two weapons, both from Priscilla, have the highest damage output on the bleed thing. So we only get to experience this power as a mortal, and as the weapon states, it turns against us. So we can't be really sure of how it would have worked for them. We do get the life hunt miracle in Dark Souls 3 through Aldrich, and we can use it to materialize a scythe that will drain health from your enemy. Like if you hit a bunch of enemies, you drain a bunch of health to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So presumably that's how it would have worked, but it's kind of hard to be sure, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And if I can just add something to what I was saying before,
Mm-hmm.
is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so we're talking about the painter being a crossbreed and how I think she would have been Velka's daughter, right?
Yeah.
A couple of things I would like to point out are that first, the statues of Velka, like the original ones from Dark Souls 1 and the one that can be found inside Ariandel Chapel, they have a child
Right.
next to her, right?
Yeah.
And it's never been explained what's the point of having the child there. So I think it's meant to symbolize the painter, her daughter. And so she would have gotten involved with the Occult Rebellion to bring down the gods in order to protect her daughter, but the rebellion failed. And I think that's why she created the painted word. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, I couldn't defeat them, so I need a backup plan. The backup plan is I'll create the painted word as a safe haven to my daughter, where the gods will be alive, but she will be safe regardless. And I think she died in the process of creating the painted word.
Mm-hmm.
So in Dark Souls 3, there are two item descriptions that I think are relevant to this point. First, there's the Rose of Ariandel that we get from Father Ariandel.
Uh-huh.
So it states that the painting was created with blood. It was painted with blood, right?
Right.
And he even uses his own blood to satiate the flame inside the Lord vessel that he's holding. And there's the Ring of Sacrifice. So the Ring of Sacrifice has always been associated with Velka. It's said to be created in a ritual of Velka, right? But in Dark Souls 3, they added a new line to the description. Now it also says that a sacrifice is only worth as much as the life it spares. This line wasn't present before. It's new to Dark Souls 3.
Uh-huh.
So if the painting is painted with blood and a sacrifice is only worth as much as the life it spares, according to a rite of Velka, a rite of sacrifice, I think she sacrificed herself to spare her daughter. So by creating the painted word, you know.
Yeah.
And that's why we never actually meet Velka. I mean, she's not around anymore. And that's also actually why I think the Crow people get sucked, drawn, dragged, whatever, to the painted word, right? They became forlorn themselves because Velka is dead. They are followers of Velka, but Velka died. So they became forlorn and in turn were drawn to the painted word.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
The only thing I'd add to it is like about Priscilla's parentage, because the theory in Dark Souls 1 is that she's Guinevere's daughter with Seath, because she looked kind of dragon-like. And she's very, very large. So the assumption was, okay, it's Guinevere and Seath because they're both known Londo. But then the Ringed City and Ashes of Ariandel kind of confused matters, because in those and also Yorshka as well, we now have three other very pale women who are dragon-like. They look like Priscilla. So we've got Yorshka, we've got the painter, and then we have Filianor, who is not as dragon-like, but does seem to have kind of scales around her eyes. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just, yeah, I don't know at all. I think the thing about the statue of the woman holding the child is like, there's also a statue of a woman holding a child in the I forget the name of it. It's the church near the first sunlight altar in Undead Parish. And then there's another statue of a woman holding a child behind Frampt's pool. And people have been going back and forth saying, like, well, who's the child? Who is it supposed to represent? And I honestly think it's just that when they were designing those places, they looked at European churches and they saw that there's a lot of statues of Mary holding Jesus.
Yeah. Didn't
really understand what it was. Or maybe they did, I don't know, and thought, okay, well, if you're designing a European church, there's a statue of a woman holding a child in it, and they just added them. It's similar to, like, there's a similar thing in Bloodborne, where there'll be, like, all this sort of Catholic imagery everywhere, but it doesn't mean the same thing it means in Catholicism. It's just like, well, we're designing something that looks Catholic, so we'll shove, like, the Pieta in here, and we'll have, like, the Eucharist and stuff, but it doesn't correlate exactly to anything that's really happening in the real world or in the story. That's just like, well, this is what they have in churches, so we'll add one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I find, like, I'm really not sure what to make of the number of statues of women holding babies in that. I think they might just be referencing real statues that they've seen.
I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Pieta.
Pieta.
I think so. Does Dark Souls 2 take place before or after 3?
Dark Souls 2 has to happen before Dark Souls 3, because there's a bunch of stuff from Dark Souls 2 that ends up in Dark Souls 3.
But if we cured the undead curse in Dark Souls 2...
Like there's paintings of stuff from Dark Souls 2 in Dark Souls 3, and they're very, very old.
But maybe they came from Dark Souls 3 to Dark Souls 2.
And they aged backwards.
Yes.
Okay.
Listen. At the altar of despair, time moves backwards.
I seriously think you could say that, like, time might be convoluted. And that might explain it.
No.
Because I don't know how else to explain anything.
Poor
Please
Bob
don't.
in the background, like dying. No! Don't say that.
No time's convoluted.
No, the new thing is time moves backwards.
Yeah.
That's my new thing.
Oh, okay.
Alright, well listen. I think 3 hours is enough for today.
Yep. Okay.
No, but it was really cool. There's I really liked a lot of your insights, Bob. Were really awesome. I never thought of it, and they do explain a lot of stuff, and they're not completely insane. So that's always a bonus.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, that's about it. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks for the patience of listening to me talk for a very long time.
Thanks for coming, Richard.
Thank you.
Am I making sense?
Yeah.
We're just being quiet.
Yeah, we're just listening. We're concentrating.
Okay.
We don't want to interrupt.
Do you notice how I don't interrupt you and how, like, I interrupt Richard all the time?
Well, thanks, I guess.
Bob, that's because you're actually interesting. Ooh, sick burn. Oh, man.
Is that going on the Patreon?
Probably.
This is like a ringtone you can download. Like,